Go ahead. Tug, feel free to start the second slide. Yeah, we have Tug to share the slide because technical issue with Mac. Anyway, so hi, I'm Fabien. I'm project manager at GitHub CoPilot. I've been doing CoPilot since the beginning, basically. So almost 1.5 years, 2 years. And you, Tug?
And I'm Tug. I'm solution engineer at GitHub, so working on the field with GitHub customer, prospect, and community. And I have been consuming and using CoPilot since the beginning, like Fabien.
Okay, thank you. So today I was planning to kind of give you a little walkthrough a bit of how Copilot came to be and where it's going. And luck happened that we had just had a big launch about 3 hours ago or something like that. We'll tell you a bit more about it if you haven't followed. But so let's jump to the first slide. If you can take the next one. Yeah, thank you. So just a brief recap of where all of those things have started. So we came kind of a long way from those initial rule-based model and those neural network. And in the last 10 years, I think deep learning kind of really came to be as, okay, there's a thing here. Now we can probably start to get something out of that. And the key breakthrough that came out of those were those image recognition software that came out that really allowed us to have software that can recognize and analyze images as almost as well as human can do. Then we started our first step into the natural language processing world with BERT and the first GPT, which was, I think, a paper from Google initially. And then we also went into some reinforcement learning with AlphaGo and all the other AI that was made by OpenAI and DeepMind in terms of solving problems in gaming, basically. And that also triggered a bit more impact into our daily life when you could see like personal assistant coming into life, content recommendation. Everybody is seeing that everywhere on their ads. That's AI running. That's all those reinforcement learning kicking in there. And then we also see this autonomous system working there. So next slide. Thank you. So what is Copilot? If you don't know, if you haven't heard, so Copilot really was, the goal was really to, how can we leverage those new technology? How can we, those emerging technology, how can we bring them to developer and improve developer lifecycle? What's coming out of this? And GitHub Copilot, really the purpose was to improve developer experience in the IDE initially, and we didn't really know how far it would go. Turned out it was a massive success when we did our technical preview last year in November. Well, yeah, last 1.5 years when we started to announce it in Universe 2021. I think we knew what would be the impact. We had a good feeling, but we didn't know how much. Can you go to the next slide? Thanks. So you all know GitHub. It's code management platform. It's a platform for collaboration, version control, and a lot more things. You have heard about OpenAI with ChatGPT, GPT-3, GPT-4 now. And the collaboration between GitHub and OpenAI came through Microsoft, who is a major shareholder in OpenAI and acquired GitHub a few years ago. Copilot really came out of that collaboration between OpenAI and GitHub through Microsoft, so the Azure DevOps teams. We have this team in GitHub called GitHub Next, and that worked on what we call Horizon 2, 3 type of projects, trying to figure out what's going to be the next big thing that might not generate revenue now, but that might impact everybody later down the road. And Copilot was the first, their brainchild, but it came out of there and as a research project. And we came in with the rest of the GitHub team realizing how powerful this could be. There was some very secretive meetings where we were like, this is going to be a big deal. We have to jump on this opportunity and do something there. And that's when we started to bring it to go from a research project into a commercial product. And there's a lot of things that happened to get to that stage. But now I think we are on the point of becoming a recognized brand. Everything is becoming Copilot in the Microsoft world. There's Microsoft 365 Copilot now. So next slide. Yeah, so now I will let Tug talk a little bit more about CoPilot and go a bit on the functionality, both for individuals and maybe a bit about businesses as well.
Okay. So one of the important part about CoPilot, it doesn't depend of where your source code is. You can use CoPilot with any source control, or even if your code is not yet into a source control. It's just a set of plugins that you have inside Visual Studio, NeoVim, VS Code, or JetBrains. So you can start tomorrow as soon as you have back on your desk to work with CoPilot. You just need a GitHub account and access to CoPilot. And CoPilot is based, as Fabien said, on OpenAI. And one interesting part is we kind of support all languages. When we say that, it's because the model that has been used to build CoPilot has been trained on all public repositories from GitHub. So all the languages that have a big representation will give you very good suggestions. And I put a link to the Octoverse, the survey that we do every year in our community, and you have some numbers. So for example, what are the top languages? It's JavaScript, Python, Java. Obviously, this language will be very well integrated with your IDE when you use Copilot. But even the one with a big growth, like for example, HashiCorp language or Rust, you will be surprised when you work with the tool to see how successful the suggestions are made or pertinent they are. This means that every time you kind of ask the questions, can Copilot do it, or can Copilot do this stuff or not? The best way, you open your IDE, you write some code, and you test, and you see how it will be. How will we do the first suggestions? And the key part on what makes a very successful suggestion is the fact that Copilot use your context of your project to make the suggestion. So based on what you have around the source code, about where you are in the source code, when you add a command, when you add a function, you will use the context. So the existing file with what is around your cursor, but also all the open file in your IDE will be used to make the suggestions, to give you some code or give you some alternatives to the code that you are currently writing. And you will see that in the demonstration. So when it's enabled, so you have the plugins, you have your IDE, you type some code, Copilot extension sends some context to the Copilot service that will provide you back some suggestions. And the completion in the IDE, it's a lot more than a single line or the end of a line. It could be a full functions, as you can see here in this example. So take your IDE when you work with GitHub CoPilot, VS Code, GitHub Codespaces, so the online IDE and developer environment that you have inside GitHub, Visual Studio on Windows, JetBrains IDEs, NeoVim, just come as you are. I like to say this: when you just take your IDE and start to work with, install the plugin, and it's done. And we have two different ways of providing Copilot to the developers. One of them is for individuals. So you take your GitHub account, you add your credit card, you have 2 months for free, and then you have a set of features that are available for you as a developer. Policies and what you can have in terms of configuration is based on your account. When you work with Copilot for Business, it's the same as for individual in terms of features, but you have additional features to allow your enterprise to manage the access to Copilot. So the billing is done at the top for your enterprise. You give access to a set of users or teams inside GitHub to your users, and you can also have some specific access, but be sure that you have a very specific privacy in the way that you manage a suggestion on the code, VPN proxy support. And the key part will be, as I said, the management of the policies and the configuration at the top level for the users. So when you work with when you work in your IDE as an individual, so you can obviously turn off or on the IDE the use of Copilot. You can opt out for some telemetry, because what we do when you work with Copilot, we send some snippet from your IDE to the service, and by default you can use that to improve the service that we provide, but you can opt out to say, don't do anything with the snippet that we send to you. And an important part about the fact that even if Copilot generates new suggestions, so the code that you receive is something that's built on the model and generates and send the suggestions, it may happen sometimes that the code that the suggested block, it's identical to some public code, and you have a configurations to say, by default, don't return this filter, don't return this code using this specific filter. And when you work inside the enterprise, when you have Copilot for Business, all this configuration about the public code configurations, for example, it's not at the top level. Nobody can override this part. If you say, I want to block any suggestions that is similar to existing public code, easy assignment of users. And we don't have the options to do anything with the telemetry on your code snippet, because we don't use that. We just use it to generate the suggestions, and we remove it from our server immediately.
Yeah, so thank you. So we talked a bit about the functionality, but and the journey of how we came to this tool. One thing that was really difficult was to figure out, okay, what's the advantage, right? Like everybody, we had a good feeling, can use it on your IDE, but can we kind of put some number behind this? Can we try to understand what really is the impact for an individual developer, but also for a business? Can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So we are using something called the SPACE framework that talks about developer productivity. That covers a lot more than the number of lines code a developer can generate. There's a lot more aspect. I'm not gonna go too much into this because this is a complex topic, but we ran a lot of survey on that, and we observed that around 96% of the 2,000 people we interviewed, 96% thought that they felt that they were faster with repetitive tasks. 88% had think they were more productive, and we call that perceived productivity, because it's not necessarily something that you can quantify exactly, but it's how you perceive your workday or how the hour of coding you've been doing. And 74% have been saying that they feel more focused on their work. 74%. And by focus, I mean less distraction. You're going less on Stack Overflow or on Google Search that takes you outside of your flow. Can you go to the next slide, bro? So here we have a bit more numbers. So I was saying 88% think they are faster. 87 also said that there was a bit less mental effort and also repetitive tasks. So I need to write a test, or I need to write 4 loops that I already wrote 3 times before. Copilot will really help with those kind of obvious cases. Spend a lot less time in searching for an answer, or how to use a specific framework, or you have a library, you import a Python library, and you don't remember how to slice a data frame or something like that. Copilot will come in and help you a lot. I'm saying Python and data frame because I used to be a data scientist. Just saying use that in production. It's just what I use sometimes. 73% of the developers also felt they were way more in their flow, in their workflow, and it's links. So those 4 metrics are part of what we call the efficiency and flow of the developer productivity metrics. Then the 2 others are about satisfaction and well-being, which is a big part of how efficient and productive a developer can be. So 60% felt they were more fulfilled, and 59% were less frustrated with coding because they spent a bit less time searching to fix an issue, to address an error. It just helps you get faster on those things and less annoyed. We are going to jump onto a small demo if you want, Doug.
So the best way to discover or look at Copilot is really using it. And I will start with, you have many different ways of showing Copilot. One of them will be, I want to start from a brand new application. So I just have if you look, I just install Node.js on Express, and I want to start to build something. In this case, my scenario, I'm just learning a technology. I know the technology. I want to do a quick website. And one of the ways to work with CoPilot is to drive the suggestions using commands. For example, I want to import Express because this is the framework that I use. Because I used to it, I will say create the app and use default port. And you see already CoPilot doing some suggestion about the commands. And for example, I can say I don't want to use I want to use 4000 because 3000, even if it's a default port most of the time for Node.js application, in my case, I want to change it. And I will also use the one that is provided by the environment if I have one. And in this case, I will simply type enter, and I have a suggestion of a line, enter again, another suggestion, and you will see we have different way of working in this case. So what is interesting here is Copilot start to understand the context where I am. I have started the applications, created the app, and based on the different steps, make some suggestions. The next stuff that I do usually when I do that, I will say add, create, code, to say hello with query name or Sweden. In this case, same approach. I will use a line-by-line generation. And you see Copilot working here. It's asking for the suggestion. In this case, it did fail the first time, but I wait a little bit. So you see automatically I have the query name that has been built, default to Sweden, and the next part will be start the applications, and automatically Copilot start to guess what the code is.
Can you increase a little bit the size of your screen?
Yeah, is it better?
Is it better? Yeah.
Okay. So most of the code has been kind of generated by the tool. So if I do nodemon and I start to work on the server, I should have hello Sweden, name equal Fabien, and hello Fabien. So you see the code has been generated automatically for me. And another way of working will be to say, instead of using line by line, let's start to work with functions. Functions get prime number from 0 to 1000. Not a very good name for the functions, but it's interesting to see that here you see the full function has been generated. But I can use a more advanced suggestion screen for Copilot by either pressing Control Enter on my keyboard. And in this case, Copilot will make multiple suggestions. And as a developer, I can check which one is the best for me, which one I'm looking for, and I will take one. I've not even read it. Don't look at it as a good example here. But the interesting part is you create a function. The next step, you will propose to consume it. So you see here, just same as before. And if I go back to my environment here, I will be able to call and get the numbers, and I'm lost into my presentation here. Okay. So if I do this, so this is for new code. If I do prime, we should have prime numbers. So just a very quick, short introduction. So one nice part about the way it works is it looks at the context of the applications. And when you are adding new code to an application, so for example, I will go to a Django application, so I'm switching to Python. And in this case, when you are working on an application, Copilots understand the context. What I mean by that is by having the context is if I don't open any window and I don't save anything, when I start from scratch, I have these empty things. And same here, I have an empty view, but my project is called books. So Copilot, when I will start to say I want to create an author, you will suggest some data. You see first name, last name, and if I want to use date of birth, you will generate automatically something that is, in my case, very interesting. I want to add the book, creating the book model, same, you will generate a part of the code. And what is interesting here is because it understands the framework, it understands where you are in the code, it makes the links between the books and the author. Maybe not the best one, because in this case, I may want to have multiple authors for one book. But you see, as a developer, is really helping me to go very, very quick to some task. For example, the next task when you do this is you want to create a view, and I keep this window open because it's part of the context that we send to the service to make the suggestion. So I will say, create view to insert new author. And I will use these suggestions. I use enter. And what is interesting in the way it's built, first of all, you have multiple suggestions, you see. And what is quite nice in this case is I will use these suggestions. And CoPilot is also, I will say it's not the case, right? But I will say it's almost reading my mind or helping me to do what will be the next step. So I know that when I do a post, I will get all these values, then I create the author, I save it, and I redirect to a specific page. If not, if I am not in the post, if I am a get, I should go to the template form that is insert author. So I should generate this page or write this page, sorry. So it's all about the interaction between the tools and between the IDE and the developer. In terms of interactions, you have different ways. So we see on new code, new applications. When you work with an existing application, I like to show my personal project because what I'm showing here is building an application that is quite basic. In this case, I have a richer application. This application is this one. So this is my windsurfing, whatever. We don't care about what the business is, but I'm building trace where I put some values and I have to print and get some value out of the database, REST API, and so on, basic services. When you look at my local application that I am coding, if I look at the same information, I am missing some field here. I'm missing the 100 meters, the nautical mile. I'm missing some data here. So what is interesting about CoPilot on the context of a developer, when we insist on the context to improve the productivity of the developer, it's this one. So let's go to the IDE. I am in my HTML page. And I am just where I print some Alpha 500. Alpha 500. I know the data set. I'm building the application. So I will use in my HTML template, show 850 meters. This is the name of my field, 30 minutes and 1 hour. And I will wait for CoPilot to generate the blocks of data that I am of data to print. And I will just go to, oops, sorry, I forgot to accept I'm not used to have a big screen like that. So I will just accept the suggestions. I will refresh the page here. Look at this block here. You see that I have new value. The interesting part about the context is CoPilot was able to guess or suggest the code that match what I have before or what I will have next. So using only the first value of my arrays of values in my data set. If I take exactly the same command, just for the purpose of the demonstration, I will go to another part of my page where instead of having all this single kind of entry, I have a different way of formatting the data. Waiting for CoPilot to generate. No, I'm not in the good place. Sorry, I was out of the tables. I will just go to I'm just looking at, I need to know, usually you will develop, in kind of step by step. So here is all. So I'm going to a good place for where I want to print the data. And you see it's changing the way the data are formatted with exactly the same command. So if I go back to my web page, if I look here, you see I have only 3 fields or 3 data. I refresh the page. I go back here and I have the data coming on the formatting, on the processing of my data in the UI match not only the data, but also the context of the application. So if you look at this from different point of view, you look at this creating the UI, you win a lot in terms of productivity, because when you build UI, you are often building blocks. So if you do Angular, Next.js, Vue.js, you will have a lot of productivity in improvement by using inline suggestion. Same for another use case when you have a lot of repetitive tasks, when you parse data coming from a database, when you are writing tests, when you are generating data for your test, generating schema for your database. You have lots of things where Copilot will help. And for me, it was really a big eye, and I probably won't be able to zoom, so I will not show too much. But if you look at this 99% code coverage, it is because of with the help of Copilot, because Copilot helped me to generate all the tests. I will just do one generation just to show you the principle. Not very important, the content, just to say I'm writing the test. I am in this case, I'm in JetBrains, giving me an opportunity to build that with 30 seconds. I say, no, it's 500 meters that I want to do in terms of data. Enter, and it's generating the test for me for the 500 meters because of the blocks on the way I'm writing code. So increasing testing is on code coverage. It's very, very easy with this type of coding. We have done some announcement, and I just want to show one interesting way of interacting with Copilot is improving and fixing some bugs with direct interaction with the code. I just have to find the application. So here I have a Java application again. In this case, I have an information coming from a pull request telling me that, careful, you have a risk of SQL injections and you should fix the problem. Giving me tips about using JDBC, using JPA, but in my case, my application is not using neither JPA, neither JDBC directly. It's using Spring JDBC, so a different framework. So I can fix the code myself by changing the query. I can also use some of the new feature we have announced. Fabien will give more, but I want to give you a quick interaction of the equivalent of the interaction will be you select the code, and I will say add high catch block and fix SQL statement with a prepare statement. So you ask Copilot to fix the code for you based on the knowledge of what we have. So we have done 2 things here: try catch, fix with using a prepare statement. And the interesting part about the next suggestions, if I add the same insert new entry in configurations table, the code that is generated is respecting the fact that I want to use a prepare statement and not a concatenation of strings. So we have filter plus context to avoid the fact that we will generate bad code. So I can continue to do a little bit more demos if you want, or if you want to switch back to the future of more information about Copilot.
We can talk about the future of Copilot. I want to just specify that what Tug just demonstrated was using Copilot Labs, so it's kind of an experimental plugin, and it's kind of, for us, it's a playground to demonstrate and test new functionality that will eventually make their way into the Copilot official product. Yes. Yeah, she's good.
Just you fixed the query which had an injection possibility, and then all the queries you wrote afterwards use the same context. If you hadn't fixed the query with the SQL injection and you were writing more queries, would CoPilot respect that context as well and generate more queries with other SQL injection possibilities?
It's possible. The reason it's called CoPilot is it's not there to code for you. It's for you to drive CoPilot, right? You set the tone of what you want to implement, and it doesn't remove the need to check. And best practices in terms of security and all that is still valid. The developer is a driver. It's
then I guess if you have a developer who is writing insecure code, CoPilot will help them produce a lot more of the same insecure code. Much faster.
So you have two parts here. You have two things. Is I voluntarily added a SQL injection in my code. If you use CoPilot from day one, now what we try to do, we have added some filter. It was from last month post. When we send back some code in the suggestions, we will not, if you don't have a context, use, sorry, I've lost in my screen. We will avoid doing SQL injection. So we will filter out when we understand when it's possible to make sure it's a little, it's secure. In the same time, and it's what Fabien said is very, very, very important. You are still responsible. It's your code that is inside the ID, even if it's been suggested. Testing, reviewing is still part of the job. Testing for security is part of the job. You have many tools on the market today that allow you to scan the code, to link the code, to avoid creating this type of errors that I've showed you. But yes, if you have too many SQL string, CoPilot may generate the same format because we want to include the code that is generated in the same kind of practices that you are using today, in the way it works when you do inline suggestion.
Thank you. I think that's a good answer.
Right.
It is absolutely significant, but how do you make sure that, because you know that programming languages evolve and libraries and frameworks and everything, and you have mentioned something specifically that it can make a distinction between a certain framework that you're using. For example, in that hypothetical scenario, you've been using Express. And imagine we were to use Express version 1, and the programming paradigm is in a certain way. And then I try to update my libraries and start using Express version 2. And there is a different method, different APIs, and probably we have come up with so many breaking changes as well. How do you make sure that the GitHub CoPilot can adapt so quickly to this really fast pace of the development in IT that we have? Because historically, it has been a major problem. And I'm really curious to know how you deal with this kind of process.
So one of the way we are mitigating this is by retraining the models that are behind and injecting the new updated frameworks into the training data sets so that CoPilot is aware of what the new framework has been out or the new practices.
So you're saying you can distinguish from a certain version to another, so you can understand I'm using a version 1, and if I were to change it to version 2, it is going to suggest me in general.
It can. It can. Not always. Sometimes there's not enough people that have been using it before. There's not enough data to feed the model, and then this is a new way of interacting with this framework. It might not always do it, but most of the time it can. Thank you.
And you also have the fact, sorry.
Yeah,
on this specific topic, so I don't know, I have not tested with Express 1 or 2, but I tested with different Java version. And at the beginning, when I started to use, it was using a way of using map on list that was quite old because it was probably the biggest presence inside public repositories. But the way you accept the suggestions, when you start to accept different suggestions, and I will choose, for example, instead of using Java 11 list, I will use a Java 17 way of working, step by step, based on your suggestions that you have accepted. The default suggestion will change and match the context of your applications on the way that you like to code. So it's also this part that at the beginning, if you start a brand new Express project, you will maybe use not exactly the version on the API that you are working, but accepting the proper suggestions step by step, it will influence the next one.
Yeah.
One question. Whenever we use AI model, usually we would love to have some level of explainability. So for example, in this case, when the Copilot generates codes, we would like to know where's the source, like from which data is get trained. So usually by that way, we can measure the risk in using that code, for example, the license behind. So is there any way to get explainability of from where this code is getting generated?
Yeah, so there is, we announced, I think a couple of months ago on our blog that we are working on a functionality that will mitigate that and find out where is this code coming from. Has it been, or is it similar to something that's already existing in the GitHub repositories that are public? And kind of give you, okay, here's a 10,000 repository where this thing has been seen. Then we just bring the information to the developer, where the developer is, so that we can investigate further if need be.
So it's possible.
It's in the work.
I just wondered if you had any feedback from people who develop codes from a test code perspective. It seems like it might be difficult to use Copilot in a test-driven methodology.
In its current state, yes, with what we announced today, and we'll talk a little bit about that, it's going to become way more possible and feasible to do test-driven development. Good question.
Yes, so if the idea is searching between the different repositories to find the best suggestion, how Copilot can guarantee that's the correct suggestion? I mean, in some language like JavaScript, you can have a bug inside the code and push it to the GitHub and without any errors. So how we can be sure that code we get there is some kind of safety to use it in the project. And the second question is, from my experience with ChatGPT, after 3 or 4 questions, it's like ChatGPT forget the previous conversation. What's the solution of Copilot for this matter?
So to your first question regarding the security aspect, Copilot is not a database search AI that digging into GitHub database. It generates code, right? It's not copying from anywhere. It just comes up with it. And how do you make sure it's safe? So we have the security filter that Tug presented earlier that can help and to mitigate that. And what we said also is it doesn't remove the need for the developer to own this code or her code and make sure that that code is secure. Copilot is not there to do it instead of you. It's here to help you do it faster. Regarding the Tug, do you want to add something on this?
No, it's very important to keep in mind you need to test, you need to write test, you need to put your CI. It doesn't change the flow, it just makes you developing faster. And sometimes when people are asking me this question, it's how do you think your code that you are creating today is good today? How do you do it? How do you make sure your code is good? Do the same.
Well, like say, like if we go back to the pre-Copilot, which was copying and pasting from Stack Overflow.
Exactly.
In Stack Overflow solutions, when you're looking for, if I search for something like how do I sort an array in C#, string array, you'll get an awful lot of solutions come up which have a numeric URL, but there'll be a URL which says in English, how do I sort an array in C#, string array, and that solution in Stack Overflow is the most highly voted solution. It's the accepted answer today. So I know that solution, because it has that URL, has some sort of quality mark attached to it compared to all the other suggestions. So when you ask how do you ensure quality, that was the old solution when it comes to Stack Overflow, and it would be nice if you could have something like that for Copilot and Question as well.
Just to finish on your second question, which was about how keeping the context for Copilot. So right now, Copilot is based on GPT-2 and it has a limited context. I think it's 2,000 tokens or 4,000. I don't remember the exact number. So it still has a limit, right? There's a technical limitation on how much context we can put in every query. And we are resending the updated context for every single query. So we are keeping track of the evolving context of where you are typing. So that kind of helps, that mitigates compared to ChatGPT, where you have a thread, you're chatting with ChatGPT, and if your thread is going too long, it's forgetting the beginning of it. While here, we're just resending the context you are working with every time. And yeah, good.
Yeah, the previous question that was there in the prompt with the security, like when you teach it to say, for example, prevent SQL injection. So if it has gone far, and is it possible to use Copilot not to just read or generate code? Can you make it like to bulk change the code afterwards? The previous code that is written, like all the SQL injections that are already in the code, can you give me suggestions to fix them?
Yeah, Doug, you want to take this one on the Copilot Labs, or I can talk about what's coming up?
No, I think it's more interesting to talk about what's coming out for this, because this is what people will use most of the time.
Yeah, okay. So I'll answer your question by moving to the next slide. Can you go back to the presentation?
Yeah, I'm just
And slide 25.
you want me to jump directly to?
Well, yeah, that's the next.
Yeah, okay, up. So let's go.
Yeah, the one. So okay, so by asking your question about how do you find existing issues in your code using Copilot. So we talked about what Copilot is today. Tomorrow, what it's going to be. So we are working on a lot of different functionality. So we want to be able to have Copilot generating unit testing, help you with test-driven development, to review code, to find error in your code, to debug existing code. We're also working on code review and PR review to help assist review existing PRs, and refactoring code, so optimize this code or use a different approach for this function and things like that. And so this slide, actually, I was supposed to remove it because today we just announced GitHub CoPilot X, and we have the announcement of it. So in the next slide, and then we can jump to Q&A. But if you can go to the next slide, and we'll play the video that was published today, like 3 hours ago. Just sound? No, there's no. Oh, you're muted. The sound, the video is muted. Still muted.
Is this Teams?
Yes.
Yeah, whenever you share, you have to share with system sounds.
Oh, Doug, did you hear?
Or you have to share with system. There's a checkbox which says system sounds when you're sharing. Otherwise, you
Yeah,
don't
but-
get any sounds.
But it's only music. Do you want music? I don't.
I mean, might as well. Okay, fair. That's fun without music, but okay.
It's down there, the sound is loud.
No, it's not shared in the team. Okay.
The ship is already saved, so.
Yeah. The streaming did not work at all.
So
What that was about?
No.
another way to show that is to show the blocks in the blog post, because you have all the different steps. Fabian, what do you think?
While you're looking for the blog post, I can talk about it. Right, it's exactly what I just said. Right, GitHub Next, Copilot Next is several things. We will have Copilot with a chat on your IDE, so a bit like ChatGPT, the context of your IDE, where you can interact and you can also talk. So voice recognition, also for accessibility, is going to be a big step forward, we think. You will have also pull review. So you will start, some repository will be able to get access to this and test AI generated, well, not the full review generated by the AI, but the review assisted by the AI. We're adding a lot of functionality regarding testing, code generation, everything I just talked about finding error in the code. It's going to be powered by GPT-4, so you will have that in the back. So right now we are announcing only the waitlists are opening, and the product launch we don't have an exact timeline at the moment, but the waitlists are opening, and you can today for each of the functionalities that interest you, you can just go there, register for the best. Yeah, so the blog. Oh, I should have.
You put it in the chat?
Yeah, can you put the blog post in the chat?
Yeah, sure.
Good, thanks. And yeah, so that's I wanted to kind of end on the announcement of CoPilot X. The video didn't work as expected, but that's okay. Oh yeah, it also generates documentation, and if you get more information to the documentation of your repository on GitHub Docs. So that's where we are today. I think it's just the beginning. We are just scratching the surface of what's possible in terms of code generation. My personal take on that is, if you compare technological revolution in society as they happened over time, you think of, I don't know, the industrial revolution took 100 years, the internet took 20 years to come about. Here we are seeing something that's happening in a few years. And I think the models that we are seeing today, they are what the earliest steam machine was to the industrial revolution. We are really at the beginning of this inflection point. And we just announced CoPilot X. Who knows what's going to be the next generation and the next one. And I guarantee you that in 12 months' time, the landscape is going to be very different. And we are really about to see a deep change in how development work is being done. Yeah, you had a question?
You showed some interesting numbers before. How big is the adoption of CoPilot today?
How many users?
Yeah.
Share that. We had in the just what I can share at least for sure is during the technical preview, which was in November, November 2021, starting November 2021, we had 1 million users in the technical preview.
Not really a question, it would have been a question, but you already answered it. Lawyers in our company were very worried about the inclusion of CoPilot code and possible hidden licenses from the source that it was taken from. But I think if that feature you're talking about, where you will have references to the sources or similar code, yeah, we could go check the licenses. I think that would entirely answer the legal questions that our lawyers have.
There's two reasons why we're building this functionality, what you just described. And the other one is also it's a tremendous learning tool, because you're using a code, you're using a framework, then you can go look where it's being used. Are you using it the right way? Are you using it in context that other people, other developers are using it the same way? Or maybe you're doing something completely different that should not be done. So that's kind of why we are using it.
What would also be nice would be if if it's the same person's code always being suggested because that person writes really good code. It'd be nice if ChatGPT or Copilots could say these are the current stars that are featured heavily in our suggestions.
I saw a blog post on that of people asking for this kind of functionality. I don't know if we can realistically do something like that.
Fabian, there's a question in the chat as well.
Oh yeah,
about getting started. So
with Copilot?
Yeah.
So
if you're a new user, what's the best way to get started?
So I think what time should, and I think maybe you even better on me to talk about that, but it's try it. Install, register, it's free for 60 days. You can go on your IDE and start coding, right? Like that's the best way to start using Copilot and see, and you will see, do you prefer to work with commands first to guide Copilot, or do you prefer to start coding and see what suggestions are coming, and you will adjust over time, maybe your coding style, or Copilot will adjust also to your coding style. We've seen both. Both way of working. There's not really a better way of working with it.
Thanks.
And as a junior developer, because I think a part of the question is about, as a junior developer, also be sure, like when you do today a Google search on the Stack Overflow, it's not about having the code in the IDE, it's to try to really understand what this code is doing. And if you have to add some printing, some log information, some debug information to understand the code, do it. Because it will help you to build a skeleton of your functions, but you are still responsible of what's it's in it. So be sure that when you do this, you are still learning the code, not simply executing some code that you don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point as well.
I've got a question in terms of the pull request and code reviewing. It seems really fascinating. However, how do you want to relate it to the business logic behind the scene? So I suppose at some point I am going to be creating pull requests and Copilot is going to be writing comments on top of that, right? How is it going to be handled?
So part of our next generation of Copilot, which is Copilot X, is how do we go further in the IDE, right? How do we bring the context that we have on the repository, for example, and we know the business logic. It's on the repository we can use. We can use that to do the code review, and that's why the PR review are done on GitHub.com most of the time, and that's where we have all that content that can be fed to Copilot to help on this PR review.
Yeah,
You have a good example. I will show you something about the context on the business. So I do something when people ask, I use two things. I use SQL because it's an old language. I'm not, when I say old, is one of the most common language. And also it has some business value. So let's create a new table. It's Pet Clinic. I don't know if you know Pet Clinic. Pet Clinic, it's a demonstration from Spring Boot, from the Java applications. And I will create table drugs with, and you will suggest some names. So let's do this.
Can you make it a little bit bigger?
It's hard for me to do bigger on this. Let's try. Give me 1 second. Let's do this. Is it better?
Yeah.
Is it good now? Yeah. Okay. So this table was created automatically with it's a drug with some value. Now I want to insert some data in this table. I keep this schema open. I go to the data field, the data SQL statement, and I will say insert data into drugs table. And inside JetBrain, the window is here to get the data generated, or the suggestion generated. And if you look at the way the AI work in this case, the AI knows that I'm talking about drugs, I'm talking about information. So he has some context from a business point of view in this case. So the more context you give, and all these values are not coming from my source code, right? This does not exist. It's come from the overall model. So imagine the same with your business on all the code that is used to do the pull request. You will be able to learn from it and be able to give some interesting comments when you do the review and when you suggest the modification. Does it?
Yeah.
Does it make sense?
And we are looking at adding a new level of a new layer on code on PR review. It's going to also get even more context as it evolves in the next few months, years, to address even more that being really able to understand how are the different parts of your code base interacting with each other. Is that code syntax, styling code makes sense compared to the rest of your code base? Like, is it the practices of your developers? Yeah, good.
How is it writing SQL queries? You know, can you sort of write something in English and get some sort of SQL query suggestion?
Well, that's what we just did.
Oh, but that's this is a one-for-one role, like insert. I mean, something like, select this data joined on that table, grouped by monthly values.
Yeah, and we So at finished working, in some cases, it doesn't always know like what's the schema of your database if it doesn't have access to it. That's
But I was wondering, because you have the table open, so you know, it does have access.
in that case, yes. And in that case, that would work. But if you have a gigantic schema and database in the back, it's not really going to be able to handle that. But otherwise, it's going to be, if it can see it, it's going to be able to interact with it and get this awareness of it.
Our developers should be terrible at SQL, so probably really useful to have that sort of help.
But always keep in mind that it's an assistant. It's your pair programmer. So you will see when you use it. During my demonstration, I show a lot of this window with a lot of suggestions. In the way I work on my project, it's mostly block by blocks. And because of the context where you are when you are coding a specific features, CoPilot will really help you by doing the next block of code that you are working on. It's not necessarily generating a full functions, but at the beginning of the function, you are, let's get this pet information from the table using a SQL statement. Maybe you have written it manually. The next step, you say, I want to do this specific operation, and the code will be generated or suggested by CoPilot on this data. When I work on some on this project, for example, it's slow, sorry. So don't look at the code. It's a code since 2017. No CoPilot back, and it's my pure personal project for the fun of it. But if I look, for example, in my catalog service is used to build something like that on a website, where I have to go to a catalog or listing many boards by brands, and so on. You see, it's a product catalog, and I have board sales and so on. So if you look into the code, I have different tables. So in this case, I'm not using a relational database. I'm using Mongo. And when you write some code, what is interesting in the way it works is, you see, I have some stupid test here to say I didn't make something very complex. When I start to add some code, CoPilot will check what makes sense the next part. So I did wingfoil. I will go to this part that is work with some specific collection or a name of collections. If sport, and as I said, please don't comment the quality of the code, look at the context. So now it will be windsurf and so on. So when we talk about having an understanding of the business, yes, CoPilot probably doesn't know exactly what I'm doing in terms of, oh, I am trying to do this part of the business, building a full catalog and so on. But based on everything that is around, when you code your application in the way you deal with business, it's not your brain that is available to build something very complex. It's really you that organize some code, some logic. In this case, CoPilot can really help and will really help you. And it's quite impressive. And it's only the beginning, right? I'm using this since a year now. And what we have announced tonight, it's quite exciting. I am impatient to test many of the features we have announced personally.
Yeah, and one of the functionality you were talking about the context of how much context can it get. Because the chat of the next generation of Copilot is using GPT-4, the context is around 6 or 7 times larger than what it can get in. So it will have a bigger awareness of what's going on. Yeah.
Feature related question, like, is there any limitation to this GitHub CoPilot? For example, is it possible to do some complex stuff like doing some animations or like integrating with frameworks that it understand the entire framework and write the best practice according to that?
I've seen entire games being made with just GitHub CoPilot. So yeah, it's possible.
Oh, very awesome. And follow-up question. I'm just wondering, like, do you have any beta program, like whenever there is GitHub CoPilot X feature getting released, like there's some beta tester, like so you have something like that?
So that's the way it is. That's been announced a release just today. So you can register there. And if you want to test also other functionality that we are just trying around to see what sticks. For example, we have CoPilot Labs, so you can just install this other extension into your IDE. And this extension is not the commercial Copilot, it's the one developed by the GitHub Next team. And they are experimenting, and whatever they come up with, they put it in there and they get feedback. So it's a bit more rough on the edges sometimes, but you also can see really cool stuff as well. So yes.
For this question, let's ignore GPT-4.
Okay.
Let's stick with GPT-3. My question is about, I think previously someone asked about Express, and then when you have, let's say, a new version of breaking change, you said let's retrain the model. I want to understand how scalable is this retraining model part. Because I know GPT-3, which Codex is based on, was last trained in 2021. Let's say if I have a new version of Express where there's breaking changes, and I upgrade my service right now to the latest version of Express, and I'm using GitHub CoPilot, and I wanted to refactor to accommodate this breaking changes. How is he going to react in this? It's not going to give me any answers. If it did, then I'm assuming the training was pretty scalable, but how fast is it? How quickly can you retrain it?
So we don't retrain it every day. I think that's a question. That's a pretty heavy and complex process to do. And we don't have a fixed rhythm of how often we retrain it. So, so do you remember when is the last time we did an update on the model?
No, I don't know. I asked, but I don't remember the answer.
Neither. I'm sorry. But the bottom line is it's not a smooth process to retrain that model, and that's why we are working on making it able to be able to have smaller increments of update to the model, also with a new version. And I'm sorry, I'm talking about GPT-4, but it has new and more up-to-date training data as well. So that's how we are dealing with it at the moment. And if you are using a new framework, you start to code with this, then Copilot doesn't necessarily need to know that new framework because it will see how you're using it and start to use whatever you're doing right now. Any other question on the chat? Maybe I missed something.
I have another use case that I have not showed that I really enjoy as a developer, and keep it as a quick and dirty approach for something, but I think it's quite interesting. It's when you want to do something very, very fast as a first iteration of a feature. And I published a small blog post about it, the feature, but one of the things that I wanted to do was to save. The reason why I mentioned a lot this website, it's because it's a real application. It's not, I only have 200 users, but it's a real app. And when you look at it, the idea was, I wanted to be able to save this image a little bit like Strava. You know, in Strava, when you can share on the social network your bike ride and so on. So I was thinking about what can I do for that. So one way it's interesting, it's where you can also work closely with ChatGPT, asking for some design idea, and then you switch to your IDE and you stay in the IDE. My goal, because it's using Google API and you need to write some JavaScript, was to say my approach will be, I want to do this. I create an HTML page. I create an HTML page with only the map, and I will save it as a screenshot, for example, using Selenium and using Playwright, because it's very easy to do. I created a function on the cloud that does this simply. And the way I developed it was, let's go into my project, add a new file, and I write a longer comment explaining exactly what I want to do. And I ask Copilot to give me a suggestion of something. So I wait, I look into the different suggestions, I look which one will be the best in my opinion for this. And I add my first iteration of this feature in 2-3 minutes. And it was really, I'm not saying that I put that in production. It was just as a starting point to think about how do I work with something new, building a new feature very, very quickly. And especially when you look, if you are building microservices applications, you may have some services that you want to evaluate very quickly. You create this, I put that in a Azure Container app, and it was done. I am currently rewriting that instead of using Selenium on Python. I'm writing in Playwright on JavaScript. And I hope that Copilot in this case will help me also to write the code, but I validated my technical feature very, very quickly. And as a personal challenge, when I was doing a presentation like that to some in a brown bag lunch at a customer, and somebody asked me, and I had no clue what this person was talking about. I say, "Can you use cognitive services with Copilot?" And this person was talking about cognitive services and was speaking about one specific one that was form recognizer. And this one, I'm not familiar with it, so let's find the English version of it. Is it this one? So this one is a tool that allows you to capture an image and transform it into some text, right? As you know, I'm not used to look on the Azure part. And I just look quickly, sorry if it's in French, but I just quickly look at tutorials, the first one to learn how to develop. Took one example, look at this example. On my challenge, and it was just a test that I wanted to do, can I use this API without being an expert, just discovering the API, without going to any Google documentation and so on, just by writing and testing in my IDE. And the flow was the following. Let me go to, I just have to find the good page. I have so many IDE open. Give me 1 second here. So the example was on form recognizer will allow you to take an image. So this one is a PNG file you see with an HTML, not an HTML, with a pure image, a PNG. And what I did, using just read the first tutorial and that's it, use commands to say, I need to get the credential, I need to set an endpoint. It was part of the doc. Then it generated all the commands that I use. It's reading the doc. And obviously, I tested each step. So it was failing sometime, it was successful sometime. And at the end, what you have is you have something like, I was able to, only using Copilot, starting to use an API that is part of the cloud offering of Azure, but you can imagine with any type of application API. Sorry, so big that Python read table. So this at the end, you just have reading the, I put the raw form extracted from the IDE into a CSV file, and I was able to extract the data. So when you want to learn a technology, obviously you will not do what I'm doing, meaning the challenge was to just say, let's see if I can stay in my IDE using Copilot to build this first pseudo service from scratch. But if you are starting to work on an API and you are starting to move to the next step you want to test, it will help you, and it will help you also to guide you to the next possible step. For example, from getting the Polar result to extracting some tables data, this part was also almost proposed as a command. So it's part of the experimentation you can do also with Copilot. See what you can take out of it as a developer.
And another application use case like that we actually encountered, I think it was last Sunday. I have a side project and we are doing quite a lot of low-level C++. And we had the framework we are using is partially developed and was missing some low-level functionality we needed, which was about processing binary file into C++ to extract geospatial data. And we had no clue whatsoever how their code was working. So we actually started to use Copilot to look into this. And it didn't solve our problem, but it gave us enough hints to know, oh, okay, we have to go this way. And then it kind of unlocked us to gave us the right nudge to start to dig and untangle everything and start to go further. I thought it was really helpful. Yeah, I'm definitely not an expert in C++, so that was helpful.
Yeah, I have a question. Like at the beginning, you showed like how it suggests like while creating an Express project, right? And for example, let's say I selected form suggestion, which is not the initial suggestion, but let's say I modified it a bit for that particular service, a customized, let's say, way to start the server. And what if I switch to a new project from scratch? So if I ask the same question, will it have the context like, okay, no, it will not.
No, it will have the context of what you have open in your ITE.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it
To a certain extent, but it won't know about another project yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even though I trained kind of like, okay, pick this one, not that.
It's not learning in the sense that it's learning from what you're doing in your current coding session.
Okay.
But if you switch project or restart your IDE or something, it doesn't have the context of the other project that you were working on before.
Okay. And like you mentioned, okay, so it works within one workspace or a project
Yes,
across all the files. It has
within the capacity of what we can send in context. You can have everything.
And then what if, let's say I opt out of telemetry that you mentioned before? Will it have the context?
So yeah, it still has the context because the context is local. The telemetry is what's used for two things. It's used for model improvement when the model is retrained, and it's used for product operational data. How many suggestions you're keeping, you're accepting, those kind of things that every product needs. So it's more like business operations type of data. That telemetry side, if you allow it, it just means you let us use it for retraining, or for further use. You block it, we just mean when you give you a suggestion, we get that context to the server, we generate a suggestion, the telemetry is thrown away. We don't keep it because you don't allow us to do it. So we just throw it away. Yeah, Doug, you open the session? Yeah.
Yeah, when my user is part of an enterprise like Fabian, our account is managed by an organization. In this case, it's a demo organization for Copilot for Business. And the access to the service, you will accept different users or teams, coming from teams being groups inside GitHub. And you can manage at the top level this policy. You don't have telemetry, so we don't do anything with in Copilot for Business, as we mentioned before. And also for the rule for the matching code, you can block or allow that. So this is one of the filters that when we send back the suggestions, if the suggestion is similar to existing code, when it's blocked, you won't have it as part of the suggestion. And it's an interesting way of looking at why Copilot for Business exists, to allow the enterprise to manage this at the top level.
So I think it's time to stop. I think we can have lots of more questions for the entire evening. This was a great discussion, a great presentation. So I thank you both, and you might be staying on for a few minutes.
Okay, I can see you.
I have a solidified T-shirt for you as well.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for being here.
I cannot hear you. You are on mute, Fabien.
Can you hear us?
Yeah. Yeah, now yes.
Yeah, good. And I'll send a T-shirt to you as well if I get your T-shirt size.
Thank you. Large, yes.
Yeah. Stay on a few minutes, you other guys, if you wanted. There's probably some sandwiches left and some tea or coffee or drinks. Come and talk with us for a few minutes if you wanted. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.